Narcissistic Personality Disorder, often shortened to NPD, is one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot these days. You'll hear people call someone a narcissist because they post too many selfies or because they like attention. But the reality of this disorder is far deeper, far more complex, and far more damaging than a social media habit or a big ego. Narcissistic personality disorder is not about confidence. It's not about ambition. It's not even about someone liking to be praised. It is a structured way of thinking, a deeply ingrained pattern of behavior, and it shows up in how a person sees themselves, how they treat others, and how they manage relationships. If we're going to talk about it honestly, we need to strip away the pop culture definitions and get to what it actually is. At its core, NPD is a personality disorder, which means it's not a phase, not a bad day, and not something someone can just snap out of. It's a rigid pattern of thoughts and behaviors that run through almost every part of someone's life. A person with NPD usually has an inflated sense of self-importance. They believe they are special, superior, or unique in ways that make them different from everyone else. And that belief isn't just internal. It shapes how they interact with the world. They often demand admiration, crave attention, and expect to be treated in ways that reinforce their sense of superiority. If that admiration isn't given freely, they may manipulate, guilt, or even punish others to get it. But here's the twist. Behind that mask of confidence and superiority, there's usually fragility. Their self-esteem isn't steady, it's brittle. That's why they need constant validation. That's why criticism, even gentle feedback, can feel like an attack. When their sense of self is challenged, they don't respond with openness. They respond with defensiveness, anger, or withdrawal. They might gaslight, they might belittle, or they might cut someone off completely. And this isn't because they're just mean or stubborn. It's because the disorder itself makes it nearly impossible for them to process anything that threatens the image they've built. Think about what that does in relationships. If you're close to someone with NPD, you often find yourself walking on eggshells. You start questioning your own reality because they've convinced you that what you saw or felt isn't true. They might make you feel like you're overreacting, too sensitive, or even the problem in the relationship. This is gaslighting, and it's one of the hallmark tactics of narcissistic behavior. Over time, that can drain you emotionally because you're constantly pouring energy into keeping the peace while your own needs and feelings are dismissed. But let's pause and clear something up. Not everyone who shows narcissistic traits has NPD. We all have moments where we want attention, moments where we feel entitled, moments where we crave recognition. That's human. NPD is when those patterns are extreme, consistent, and destructive to both the person and the people around them. It's when those traits aren't just occasional, but form the foundation of how someone operates in daily life. So, what causes it? There isn't a single answer. Like most mental health disorders, NPD develops through a mix of genetics, upbringing, and environment. Some research suggests that children who were excessively praised without balance may develop an inflated sense of self. On the other side, kids who were severely criticized or neglected might also develop NPD as a defense mechanism, creating a false self-image to protect themselves from feelings of worthlessness. In other words, NPD often starts as a survival strategy in childhood. But over time, that survival strategy hardens into a personality structure that hurts more than it protects. What makes NPD particularly challenging is that many people with it don't see themselves as having a problem. They don't walk into therapy saying, I think I have narcissistic personality disorder and I want help. More often, they come in because their relationships are falling apart, their career is on the line, or someone pressured them into seeking counseling. And even then, admitting fault or vulnerability is incredibly difficult for them. That's why treatment takes patience, skill, and a willingness to face truths they've spent a lifetime avoiding. Therapy for NPD usually focuses on talk therapy, particularly approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy or psychodynamic therapy. The goal is not to erase someone's personality, but to help them build healthier ways of relating to themselves and others. It involves learning to recognize destructive patterns, understanding where they came from, and practicing empathy and accountability. Progress is often slow, but it is possible. People with NPD can improve their relationships and their ability to function when they commit to the work. But what about the people who live with or love someone with NPD? That's where boundaries come in. Being around someone with narcissistic traits can feel overwhelming. You can get caught in cycles of manipulation, guilt, and confusion. The most powerful tool you have is knowing what you will and will not accept. Boundaries are not about changing the other person. They are about protecting your own well-being. That might mean limiting your time with them, refusing to engage in arguments that go in circles, or in some cases, walking away altogether. And if you've been on the receiving end of a narcissist's behavior, you need to hear this: it wasn't your fault. Their behavior didn't happen because you weren't enough, didn't give enough, or didn't love them the right way. Narcissistic personality disorder is about them, not you. Healing after that kind of relationship means reconnecting with your own sense of reality, rebuilding trust in yourself, and often seeking support through therapy, friends, or communities who understand what you've been through. When you step back, what makes NPD so complicated is the paradox. You have someone who presents as confident, powerful, and superior, but beneath that surface is deep insecurity and fear of being seen as inadequate. You have someone who seeks love and admiration, but the way they demand it often drives people away. You have someone who wants connection, but the very disorder that drives them keeps them from building the genuine intimacy they crave. It's a cycle that feeds itself. That's why awareness matters. The more we understand what NPD is and what it isn't, the more we can separate the pop culture labels from the clinical reality. The word narcissist shouldn't be a casual insult. It describes a real, painful, and challenging disorder. Using it lightly dilutes its meaning and can minimize the experiences of those truly impacted by it. Now, does this mean we write people with NPD off as hopeless? No. But it does mean we set realistic expectations. Change is possible, but it requires deep work, consistent effort, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Not everyone with NPD will choose that path, but some will. And when they do, it can open doors to healthier, more balanced lives. On the other side, if you're someone who has been hurt by a narcissist, your healing is not dependent on them changing. It's about you reclaiming your voice, your confidence, and your boundaries. You don't have to live in the shadow of their behavior. You can step forward, stronger and wiser, carrying the lesson that you deserve relationships rooted in respect and empathy. So when we ask, what is narcissistic personality disorder? The answer isn't simple. It's a personality disorder defined by grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy, but it's also a mask, a defense, and a wound. It shapes lives, it complicates relationships, and it requires compassion paired with boundaries to navigate. And maybe the biggest truth is this: the more we understand it, the less power it has to confuse us, hurt us, or define the way we see ourselves. At the end of the day, narcissistic personality disorder is not just a label, not just an insult, and not just a quirk of personality. It is a complex psychological condition that deserves understanding, not in the sense of excusing harmful behavior, but in the sense of recognizing what drives it and how it impacts lives. When we talk about it honestly, we create room for compassion without losing sight of accountability. We remind ourselves that the presence of NPD in someone else's life does not have to steal our peace, our self-worth, or our future. Awareness gives us clarity, boundaries give us strength, and healing gives us freedom. That's what NPD really is, and that's why it matters that we understand it. When we start looking at narcissistic personality disorder in daily life, the reality becomes clearer. Imagine a workplace. A boss with NPD doesn't just want respect for the role they hold, they demand admiration constantly. It's not enough that you complete your work on time or meet expectations. They need to feel like they're the smartest person in the room, the most innovative, the one who makes everything happen. And if you offer a suggestion that challenges them, it's not taken as feedback, it's taken as a threat. Suddenly, you might find yourself dismissed, undermined, or even punished for daring to speak up. That's not leadership. That's the disorder working through them, distorting how they see themselves and how they relate to others. Or think about a romantic relationship. At the beginning, being with someone with NPD can feel intoxicating. They often know how to charm, how to make you feel chosen, how to sweep you up in grand gestures and promises. This stage, often called love bombing, makes you feel like you've met someone extraordinary. But over time, that charm shifts. The admiration they showered on you begins to fade because it was never really about you. It was about how you made them feel about themselves. When the relationship no longer fuels their ego in the same way, they may grow distant, critical, or even cruel. Suddenly, you're left wondering what happened, how the person who once made you feel so special now makes you feel invisible or unworthy. That confusion is part of the cycle, and it keeps many people trapped far longer than they want to be. Friendships with someone who has NPD can be just as difficult. At first, it might feel flattering to be close to someone who seems confident and outgoing. They may talk about their achievements, their plans, their connections, and you might be swept along for the ride. But soon you notice the imbalance. Conversations always circle back to them. Your victories are downplayed while theirs are exaggerated. Your struggles might be ignored, or worse, turned into reasons why you should admire how well they handle life compared to you. Over time, you realize that the friendship isn't really mutual. It's not about connection. It's about being an audience, about feeding their need to feel important. The damaging part of all of this is subtle. It's not always the dramatic blow-ups or the obvious cruelty. Sometimes it's the slow erosion of your confidence, the way you start second, guessing your memory after they deny things you know happened, the way you shrink yourself to avoid conflict, or the way you feel guilty for wanting more than crumbs of real empathy. That's why understanding NPD matters so much. Because when you know what's happening, you stop blaming yourself for their behavior. You stop trying to fix them at the expense of yourself. Another layer to this is how people with NPD often create a public and private version of themselves. To outsiders, they may appear charismatic, accomplished, and even generous. But behind closed doors, the mask can slip. That's where the controlling, dismissive, or manipulative behaviors often show up. This split makes it even harder for those close to them because when you try to explain what's happening, others may not believe you. They see the polished version, the charming exterior, and assume you must be exaggerating. That isolation deepens the impact, leaving you feeling like you're alone in what you're experiencing. Now, let's dig into the psychology of why empathy is such a struggle for those with NPD. True empathy requires being able to step outside yourself to imagine and value the feelings of someone else. But for a person with NPD, their inner world is so consumed with protecting their fragile self-image that there's little room for anyone else's emotions. When they do express empathy, it's often what psychologists call cognitive empathy. They can intellectually understand what someone is feeling, but it doesn't deeply connect or move them in the way it would for most people. Sometimes that cognitive empathy is even used as a tool for manipulation because they know what to say or do to get the reaction they want, not because they truly feel with you. That lack of empathy creates ripple effects. It means they struggle with accountability. If you confront them about how their actions hurt you, they may twist the narrative, accuse you of being too sensitive, or shift the blame onto someone else. This is not just stubbornness. It's the disorder protecting the fragile ego at all costs. Taking responsibility threatens the image of superiority, so denial and deflection become their shields. Over time, those shields harden, making it harder and harder to reach the real person beneath them. But let's take a step back and recognize something important. People with NPD didn't wake up one day and decide to be this way. For many, the roots go back to early experiences of neglect, inconsistency, or conditional love. Maybe as children, they only received affection when they achieved something. Maybe they were constantly compared to others, never feeling good enough, so they built a persona to hide the pain. Or maybe they were praised excessively without limits, learning that their worth was tied only to being special. In both cases, a false self is created, a mask that says, "I am superior," covering the fear underneath that whispers, "I am not enough." That doesn't excuse the harm their behavior causes, but it explains why it feels so deeply ingrained. In society, NPD can play out in very visible ways. Look at figures in entertainment, politics, or business who seem larger than life, who demand admiration, who punish dissent, who cannot tolerate criticism. Many of them may not have full-blown NPD, but you can see the traits. You can see how the hunger for power, attention, and recognition becomes the driving force. And while those traits can sometimes lead to success on the surface, they often come at the expense of authentic relationships and genuine fulfillment. Because at the core, narcissism is a hungry void. No amount of praise, success, or admiration ever truly fills it for long. What about healing? Can someone with NPD change? Yes, but the path is narrow. It requires them to first recognize that there's a problem, which is often the biggest hurdle. Then it takes a willingness to engage in therapy, to face the discomfort of vulnerability, and to practice new patterns of relating to others. Progress isn't about turning them into someone else. It's about softening the rigidity, about helping them see value in empathy, in accountability, in connection. And it's about learning to manage the triggers that make them lash out when they feel threatened. But healing is not just for them, it's also for the people who have lived in their orbit. If you've been in a relationship, workplace, or family dynamic with someone who has NPD, your healing matters just as much. It starts with reclaiming your sense of self. That means trusting your own perceptions again after being told they're wrong. It means setting boundaries without guilt. It means recognizing that love should not come at the cost of your dignity. And sometimes it means grieving the relationship you wished you had, but accepting the one that truly exists. Support is essential in this process. Whether it's therapy, support groups, or trusted friends, having people who validate your experiences helps you rebuild. Because narcissistic dynamics thrive in secrecy and isolation. The moment you bring them into the light, the moment you speak about what's happening, their power over you weakens. And as you heal, you might even find yourself looking at narcissism with a more balanced perspective. Not excusing it, not minimizing it, but seeing it for what it is, a disorder rooted in insecurity, playing out as arrogance, manipulation, and control. You start to realize that their behavior is about their struggle, not your worth. That clarity frees you. It doesn't erase the pain, but it gives you a framework to understand it and move beyond it. Another important point is that NPD exists on a spectrum. Some people may have strong traits without meeting the full criteria for diagnosis. Others may have severe forms that dominate every aspect of their life. That spectrum means our interactions with narcissism will look different depending on the person. Some relationships may be manageable with strong boundaries. Others may be too toxic to sustain. The key is recognizing where you are and choosing what protects your well-being. As we consider all of this, let's not forget that people with NPD are human. They have fears, longings, and vulnerabilities, even if they hide them under layers of defense. Seeing that humanity doesn't mean tolerating abuse. It means understanding that their behavior comes from a place of woundedness as much as arrogance. Holding that dual perspective, compassion and boundaries, allows us to respond wisely. And maybe that's the lesson NPD teaches us all, to see beneath appearances, to recognize that confidence without empathy is hollow, to learn that love without respect is not really love, and to remind ourselves that protecting our own dignity is not selfish, it's necessary. Narcissistic personality disorder is more than just a label or a passing buzzword. It's a deeply rooted psychological condition that shapes how a person sees themselves and how they interact with everyone around them. It thrives on control, on validation, and on the illusion of superiority, but beneath that mask is a fragile sense of self that constantly fears being exposed as not enough. For those living with it, the disorder creates cycles of conflict, distance, and unfulfilled longing. For those in relationships with it, the impact is often confusion, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion. But the power of understanding what NPD really is lies in the clarity it brings. When we name it for what it is, we stop blaming ourselves for behavior we didn't cause. We stop trying to fix someone else at the expense of our own peace. The truth is, people with NPD can change, but only if they are willing to do the hard, uncomfortable work of facing themselves honestly. Not everyone will choose that path, and that's where our responsibility becomes protecting our own boundaries and choosing what is healthiest for us. Healing from the grip of narcissism, whether as the one who has it or the one affected by it, is never easy, but it is possible. And as we move forward, we carry the reminder that compassion does not mean allowing abuse, and empathy does not mean surrendering our dignity. So the takeaway is simple but powerful. Narcissistic personality disorder is real, it's complicated, and it has consequences, but it doesn't have to define you whether you live with it or live around it. Knowledge gives you freedom, boundaries give you strength, and healing gives you hope. That's what understanding NPD truly offers.